A blood-curdling scream echoed through the rugged terrain of the New Mexico territory as Willow Lambert clutched desperately at the rocky ground, her fingernails breaking as she was dragged backward into the shadow of Eagles Canyon. The year was 1877, and the merciless sun beat down upon the landscape as if bearing witness to her struggle, indifferent yet all-seeing. "Help!" she cried out, her voice swallowed by the vastness of the wilderness. The hem of her once pristine blue calico dress was now torn and stained with red dust, as her assailant, a man whose face she'd glimpsed only briefly in Socorro, pulled her deeper into the canyon by her ankles. Willow had arrived in the territory just 3 weeks prior, having traveled from Boston to take a position as the new schoolteacher. At 22, she had been eager to escape the suffocating expectations of her family and carve out a life of her own. Now, as the jagged rocks scraped against her back, she wondered if she had made a fatal mistake. Miles away, Wade Farley adjusted his worn leather hat as he guided his horse along the dusty trail toward Socorro. At 28, he had spent the better part of a decade working cattle drives and hunting bounties across the Western territories. His weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a man who had seen his fair share of hardship. But his eyes, clear blue and alert, revealed an intelligence that had kept him alive when others had fallen. "Something's not right, Dust," he murmured to his dun-colored stallion, noticing fresh tracks veering off the main trail, a wagon wheel's impression accompanied by boot prints and what appeared to be drag marks. Wade had lived long enough in these parts to know that such signs rarely foretold anything good. Following his instincts, he guided Dust off the trail, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. The tracks led toward Eagles Canyon, a treacherous ravine known for its steep walls and hidden caves, a perfect hideout for outlaws and those looking to disappear. As Wade approached the canyon's entrance, he dismounted, tethering Dust to a gnarled juniper tree. "Stay quiet now," he whispered, patting the horse's neck before drawing his gun and moving forward on foot. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows that would soon swallow the landscape in darkness. Willow's strength was failing her. After being dragged into a cave nestled within the canyon walls, she had been bound and gagged by her captor, a greasy-haired man who reeked of whiskey and hatred. She recognized him now as the same man who had watched her with unsettling intensity at the general store in Socorro. "Nobody's gonna find you here, schoolmarm," he sneered, lighting a small fire near the cave entrance. "Them folks in town think too highly of themselves to venture this far out. By the time they realize you're missing, we'll be long gone." Willow's mind raced. She had come west to teach children, to build something meaningful in a land of opportunity. Now, trussed up like an animal for slaughter, she felt her dreams slipping away with each passing moment. Fighting against her bindings, she managed to loosen the gag enough to speak. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice hoarse from screaming. The man turned, his yellowed teeth visible in the growing firelight. "You're my ticket, lady. That fancy education of yours is gonna help me write some convincing letters to your rich family back east. They'll pay handsomely to get you back, or at least they'll think they're getting you back." A chill ran through Willow that had nothing to do with the cooling desert air. This man intended to ransom her and then kill her regardless of whether her family paid. The realization brought fresh tears to her eyes, but also a surge of determination. She would not die in this god-forsaken cave without a fight. Outside, Wade carefully made his way into the canyon, following the trail of disturbed earth and occasional droplets of what he feared was blood. The setting sun cast an eerie glow on the red rock walls, and the unusual silence, no birds, no skittering lizards, put his nerves on edge. He had tracked men through worse terrain, but something about this trail felt personal, urgent. As twilight deepened, Wade spotted a faint glow emanating from a cave halfway up the canyon wall. Carefully, he made his way closer, using the growing darkness and his knowledge of how to move silently to his advantage. The sound of a man's voice carried on the still air, followed by a softer, more desperate voice that Wade immediately recognized as female. His jaw tightened. In his years roaming the frontier, Wade had seen the worst of what men could do to one another, and especially to women. The lawlessness of the territories attracted those seeking freedom, but it also drew predators hunting for victims beyond the reach of civilization's protections. Inside the cave, Willow watched as her captor rummaged through her satchel, pulling out the leather-bound journal where she had recorded her thoughts about her new life in the West. He flipped through it carelessly, pausing occasionally to read passages aloud in a mocking tone. "The children here have such potential if only given the proper guidance," he read, laughing. "Lady, these kids ain't gonna be nothing but cowhands and whores. Your fancy Eastern ideas don't mean squat out here." "You're wrong," Willow countered, finding courage in defending her beliefs. "Education is what will transform this territory into something greater. These children deserve the same opportunities as any in Boston or New York." The man snorted, tossing the journal into the fire. "Save your preaching, won't be no one to hear it soon enough." As Willow watched her words curl and blacken in the flames, a movement at the cave entrance caught her eye, a shadow, darker than the rest, shifting against the rock wall. Hope flared within her, but she quickly masked her expression, not wanting to alert her captor. Wade assessed the situation from just outside the cave mouth. One man, armed with a revolver and a hunting knife visible in his boot. One woman, bound but conscious, showing remarkable composure despite her predicament. The cave itself was shallow enough that Wade could see its entirety from his position. There were no other visible exits or entrances. Drawing a deep breath, Wade stepped into view, his Colt aimed steadily at the kidnapper. "I suggest you step away from the lady," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. The man whirled around, his hand reaching for his gun. Wade's shot rang out before the kidnapper could clear his holster, the bullet striking his shoulder and spinning him backward. He crashed against the cave wall with a howl of pain, his gun clattering to the ground. Wade moved forward swiftly, kicking the fallen weapon away before the man could recover. "Next one goes between your eyes if you so much as twitch," he warned, keeping his revolver trained on the wounded kidnapper. Willow stared at her rescuer, taking in his tall frame, the determined set of his jaw beneath several days' worth of stubble, and the steady hands that held the weapon as if it were an extension of himself. He wasn't the law, no badge adorned his dust-covered vest, but in that moment he represented salvation itself. "Are you hurt, madam?" Wade asked, his eyes briefly meeting hers before returning to the groaning man on the ground. "Not seriously," Willow managed, struggling against her bonds. "But I would be grateful for assistance with these ropes." Wade nodded, producing a knife from his belt while maintaining his aim on the kidnapper. "Hold still," he instructed, moving behind her to cut through the bindings. As the ropes fell away, Willow rubbed her chafed wrists, wincing at the raw skin. "Thank you," she said softly. "I feared no one would find me out here." "Lucky I noticed the tracks," Wade replied, retrieving a length of rope from his saddlebag which he'd brought with him into the cave. With efficient movements, he bound the kidnapper's hands and feet, ignoring the man's stream of curses and threats. "What's your name, madam?" "Willow Lambert. I'm the new schoolteacher in Socorro." She stood shakily, brushing dust from her torn dress. "And you are Wade Farley." "Just passing through these parts." He secured the final knot on the kidnapper's bindings before turning his full attention to Willow. In the flickering firelight, he could see the scratches on her arms and face, the exhaustion in her eyes, but also a resilience that impressed him. "We need to get you back to town, Miss Lambert. Can you ride?" "Yes, though it's been some time," she admitted. "What about him?" She nodded toward her captor, who had fallen silent, his face contorted with pain and rage. "We'll bring him too." The sheriff in Socorro might be interested in having a conversation with him. Wade's expression darkened. Kidnapping carries a heavy penalty in these territories. As they prepared to leave the cave, Wade extinguished the fire and gathered what remained of Willow's belongings. Her journal was beyond saving, but he recovered a small locket that had fallen from her satchel, handing it to her with unexpected gentleness. "This looked important," he said. Willow accepted the locket, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched the silver memento containing miniature portraits of her parents. "It is, thank you." The night air was cool as they emerged from the cave, the vast expanse of stars above them a reminder of how small they were in the wilderness. Wade helped Willow navigate the rocky path down to where Dust waited patiently, then returned for the kidnapper, whom he hauled unceremoniously over his shoulder. "We'll have to ride double," Wade explained, settling the bound man face down across the horse's hindquarters before helping Willow into the saddle. "Dust is strong enough to carry us all back to Socorro, though it won't be the most comfortable ride." Wade mounted behind Willow, reaching around her to take the reins. The proximity was intimate by necessity, and Willow found herself acutely aware of the strength in the arms that bracketed her, the solid presence at her back offering security she hadn't felt since leaving Boston. As they began the slow journey back to town, Willow's exhaustion caught up with her. Despite her best efforts to remain alert, she found herself leaning back against Wade's chest, her eyes growing heavy. "Rest if you need to," Wade said quietly. "I've got you." Those simple words of assurance were the last Willow heard before surrendering to sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the knowledge that she was, against all odds, safe. The first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon when they reached Socorro. The town was just beginning to stir, a few early risers moving about the dusty streets as Wade guided Dust toward the sheriff's office. Willow had awakened as they approached town, straightening in the saddle and trying to compose herself despite her disheveled appearance. Sheriff Daniel Morgan was already at his desk when they arrived, his graying mustache twitching with surprise as Wade entered, supporting Willow with one arm while dragging the bound kidnapper with the other. "Farley, what in tarnation?" The sheriff rose quickly, moving to assist. "Miss Lambert. The whole town's been in an uproar since you didn't return from your ride yesterday afternoon. This man abducted her," Wade explained, shoving the kidnapper toward the cell at the back of the office. "Found them in a cave in Eagles Canyon. He was planning to ransom her, then kill her regardless." The sheriff's face darkened as he unlocked the cell. "Benson Tucker," he spat, recognizing the prisoner. "Should have known you'd show your face around here again. You're wanted in 3 territories for similar offenses." As Sheriff Morgan secured Tucker in the cell, Wade turned his attention back to Willow, who stood shakily by the door. "You should see the doctor, Miss Lambert," he suggested, noting how pale she looked in the morning light. "I will," she promised, "but first I must properly thank you, Mr. Farley. You saved my life." Wade shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Willow insisted. "You did." Before Wade could respond, the door burst open, and several townspeople rushed in, including the elderly woman who owned the boarding house where Willow stayed. "Oh, Miss Lambert," Mrs. Hollister exclaimed, enveloping Willow in a tight embrace. "We feared the worst when your horse returned without you." As the townspeople surrounded Willow, expressing their relief and concern, Wade slipped quietly toward the door. He had delivered the lady and her captor safely to town. His job was done. It was time to move on, as he always did. But as he reached for the door handle, Willow's voice called out to him. "Mr. Farley, wait." The crowd parted as she moved toward him, her blue eyes meeting his with an intensity that momentarily rooted him to the spot. "Will you be staying in Socorro?" She asked, a note of hope in her voice that caught Wade off guard. He hesitated, unaccustomed to being wanted anywhere. "I hadn't planned on it, madam. I'm headed to Santa Fe on business." Disappointment flickered across her face before she composed herself. "I understand. But should you pass through Socorro again, please know you will always be welcome at my table. It's the least I can offer in return for what you've done." Something about her earnestness, the genuine warmth in her voice, made Wade reconsider his habitual pattern of passing through places without forming attachments. "I might be back this way in a few weeks," he found himself saying. "If you're still offering that meal then." A smile brightened Willow's tired face. "I most certainly will be." With a tip of his hat, Wade departed, mounting dust and continuing north towards Santa Fe. But as the town of Socorro faded behind him, he found himself thinking about the schoolteacher's smile, the determination in her eyes despite her ordeal, and the meal he had unexpectedly promised to return for. 3 weeks later, as summer heat settled over the New Mexico territory, Wade found himself approaching Socorro once again. His business in Santa Fe delivering documents to a cattle baron from his employer in Texas had concluded more quickly than anticipated. He could have taken a more direct route back south, avoiding Socorro entirely, but the memory of a certain schoolteacher had lingered in his mind. The town appeared unchanged as he rode down the main street, dust swirling around Dust's hooves. Children played in the shadow of the adobe church, and men gathered outside the saloon, seeking respite from the afternoon sun. Wade tethered his horse outside the general store, deciding to purchase supplies before seeking out Willow Lambert if, indeed, he decided to seek her out at all. As he was examining a new leather belt, a small voice piped up beside him. "Are you Mr. Farley, the one who rescued Miss Lambert from the bad man?" Wade looked down to find a boy of about 8 staring up at him with undisguised admiration. "I am," he admitted, uncomfortable with the child's hero worship. "Miss Lambert told us all about you," the boy continued excitedly. "She said you're the bravest man in the territory. She's at the schoolhouse now, teaching my sister's class." Wade thanked the boy for the information, purchased his supplies, and found himself walking toward the small schoolhouse at the edge of town before he could reconsider. The sound of children's voices reciting multiplication tables guided him to a modest building with a freshly painted sign declaring it Socorro School. Through the open window, he could see Willow moving among the students, her recovered poise evident in the graceful way she guided a young girl's hand across a slate. Her hair, which had been wild and tangled when he'd found her in the canyon, was now neatly arranged in a bun at the nape of her neck, and her dress, a simple green calico, was crisp and clean. Wade hesitated, suddenly aware of his dust-covered clothes and unshaven face. He was about to retreat when Willow glanced up, her eyes widening as she spotted him through the window. A smile spread across her face, transforming her features in a way that made Wade's chest tighten inexplicably. "Children, please continue with your sums," she instructed, moving swiftly to the door and stepping outside to greet him. "Mr. Farley, you returned," said I would, he replied, removing his hat. "Hope I'm not interrupting your teaching." "Not at all, we're nearly finished for the day." Willow studied him, noting the new lines of fatigue around his eyes. "Have you just arrived in town?" Wade nodded. "Came from Santa Fe, thought I'd stop by before heading south again." "Then you must join me for supper," Willow insisted. "I promised you a meal and I keep my promises." "Can you return at 6? The schoolhouse will be empty then, and I often prepare my evening meal here." Surprised by her invitation, he had expected perhaps a quick word of thanks, not an actual meal. Wade found himself agreeing. 6 it is, Miss Lambert." "Willow, please," she corrected him with a gentle smile. "After what we experienced together, formality seems unnecessary." As Wade walked back toward the center of town, intending to visit the barber and perhaps purchase a new shirt before returning for supper, he realized he was looking forward to the evening more than he had anticipated. It had been a long time since he had shared a meal with anyone whose company he genuinely desired. At precisely 6 o'clock, Wade returned to the schoolhouse, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt beneath his usual vest. He had even polished his boots, an effort that earned him a raised eyebrow from the livery stable owner who had watched him prepare for the evening. The schoolhouse was quiet when he arrived, the children long gone. A lantern burned in the window, casting a warm glow into the gathering dusk. Wade knocked on the door frame and Willow's voice called for him to enter. The interior had been transformed. The students' desks were pushed to one side, and a small table had been set up near the pot-bellied stove, which provided both warmth and a cooking surface. The aroma of beans, cornbread, and something sweeter apple pie perhaps filled the room. Willow stood by the stove, stirring a pot of beans. She had changed into a simpler dress of deep blue, her hair loosened from its severe bun into a softer style that framed her face. "Welcome, Mr. Wade," she corrected herself with a smile. "I hope you're hungry." "Starving," he admitted, setting his hat on a hook by the door. "This is quite a spread for a schoolhouse." "I've made this place my home as much as my boarding room," Willow explained, gesturing for him to sit. "Mrs. Hollister doesn't allow cooking in our rooms, so I've arranged with the school board to use the stove here. They were quite accommodating after." She trailed off, the memory of her abduction briefly shadowing her face. Wade sat at the small table watching as Willow efficiently served the meal. "How have you been since then?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "Some experiences leave deeper marks than others." Willow paused, considering his question seriously. "I have nightmares sometimes," she admitted. "And I haven't ridden alone outside town since that day, but I refuse to let fear dictate my life. The children need their teacher to be strong." Her resilience impressed Wade anew. "You are strong," he said quietly. "Stronger than most men I've known." A flush colored Willow's cheeks at his words. "Thank you. Now please eat before it gets cold." The meal was simple but delicious: beans flavored with salt pork and chili peppers, cornbread still warm from the oven, and sliced tomatoes fresh from someone's garden. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Wade had expected. Willow told him about her students, the progress they were making, and her plans to start an evening class for adults who wished to improve their reading. In turn, Wade found himself sharing stories of his travels across the territories, carefully editing out the more violent aspects of his work as a sometime bounty hunter. He spoke instead of the landscapes he had seen, the people he had met, and the freedom of life on the trail. "It sounds lonely," Willow observed as they finished the apple pie she had indeed prepared for dessert. "Always moving, never putting down roots." Wade shrugged, uncomfortable with her perception. "It suits me. I'm not much for settling down." "Everyone needs a home eventually," Willow said softly. "A place to return to, people who care whether you live or die." The comment struck closer to Wade's carefully guarded heart than he cared to admit. Perhaps, but not everyone finds that place or those people. Willow met his gaze across the table, her blue eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Sometimes they find you when you least expect it." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Wade found himself studying the curve of her cheek, the way her hair caught the golden light, and wondering what it would be like to stay in one place long enough to know someone like Willow Lambert truly. The moment was broken by the distant sound of the church bell tolling 8 o'clock. Willow blinked as if waking from a trance and began clearing the dishes. "I've kept you too long," she said, her professional demeanor returning. "You must have plans for your stay in Socorro." "No plans," Wade admitted, rising to help her with the cleanup despite her protests. "I thought I might stay a few days before continuing south. The horse could use the rest." Hope flickered in Willow's eyes. "Then perhaps we might see each other again before you leave," Wade surprised himself by suggesting. "I could escort you on a ride tomorrow if you'd like." "Might help with those fears you mentioned." The suggestion clearly pleased her. "I would like that very much. After school, around 4, I'll be here," Wade promised, helping her extinguish the lamps as they prepared to leave. He walked her to Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless allowed him to step in should any danger present itself. Socorro was generally peaceful, but Wade had learned long ago that trouble could find a person anywhere. At the boarding house steps, Willow turned to him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "Thank you again, Wade, not just for the rescue but for returning as you promised. It means more than you might realize." Before he could respond, she leaned forward and pressed a quick, soft kiss to his cheek, then hurried inside, leaving Wade standing in the street, his hand unconsciously rising to touch the spot where her lips had brushed his skin. As he walked toward the hotel where he had taken a room, Wade acknowledged to himself that his planned few days in Socorro might extend longer than anticipated. The pull he felt toward Willow Lambert was unlike anything he had experienced before, a desire not just for the physical beauty she possessed, but for the strength of character and warmth of spirit he had glimpsed during their meal together. For the first time in years, Wade Farley found himself considering the possibility of staying put. The following afternoon, true to his word, Wade appeared at the schoolhouse as the children were being dismissed. He had spent the morning at the livery stable, arranging for a gentle mare for Willow to ride, and had packed a small basket of provisions from the hotel kitchen: bread, cheese, and a bottle of lemonade for a modest picnic. Willow's face lit up when she saw him waiting, and the children giggled and whispered among themselves as their teacher hastily gathered her things and locked the schoolhouse door. She had changed from her teaching clothes into a practical riding skirt and jacket, her hair braided and pinned to accommodate a hat. "You look ready for an adventure," Wade commented as they walked toward the livery stable. "A small one, perhaps," Willow replied with a nervous smile. "I confess I'm more anxious about this than I let on last night." Wade appreciated her honesty. "We won't go far and we'll stay on well-traveled trails. No canyons," he added, immediately regretting the reference when he saw her face pale slightly. But Willow squared her shoulders, determination replacing the momentary fear. "No, we should go to the canyon. I need to face it again, to see it in daylight with a trusted companion, not as a place of terror but simply as part of the landscape." Wade studied her with newfound respect. "If you're certain, then that's where we'll go, but only to the entrance. No need to push too far today." At the livery stable, Willow approached the mare Wade had selected with cautious confidence. "She's beautiful," she said, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "What's her name?" "Daisy," the stable boy supplied. "Gentlest mare in the territory. Even the banker's wife can ride her without fuss." Wade helped Willow mount, noting the proper form she maintained despite her admitted lack of recent riding experience. He swung himself onto Dust's back, and they set off at a leisurely pace, heading west out of town toward the distant silhouette of Eagles Canyon. The afternoon was pleasantly warm, a light breeze tempering the heat as they rode side by side down the main trail. Conversation flowed easily between them, with Willow sharing stories of her life in Boston and her decision to come west. "My parents were scandalized," she admitted with a laugh. "They had envisioned me marrying a suitable Boston gentleman and hosting tea parties for the rest of my days. When I announced my intention to teach in the territories, my mother took to her bed for 3 days. And yet you came anyway," Wade observed. "That took courage." Willow's expression grew thoughtful. "I needed something more than the life that had been planned for me. I wanted to make a difference, to build something meaningful. The West, for all its dangers, offers that opportunity in a way the East no longer does." Wade understood her sentiment better than she might have guessed. "Freedom to shape your own destiny," he said. "It's what draws many of us out here." "And what drew you?" Willow asked, genuinely curious. "You've never mentioned your life before the territories." Wade was silent for a long moment, considering how much to share. Finally, he said, "I grew up in Georgia. My family lost everything in the war: our farm, my father, 2 brothers. Afterward, there wasn't much left for me there but bitter memories. I headed west when I was 18, worked cattle drives, took odd jobs, eventually found I had a knack for tracking and hunting skills that pay well in these parts." "Bounty hunting," Willow said softly, surprising him with her perception. "I suspected as much from things you've said. Is that what takes you to Santa Fe and beyond, following those who have broken the law?" Wade nodded, watching her carefully for signs of disapproval or fear. "It's not work for a gentleman, but it's honest in its way. I only take contracts for men who deserve what's coming to them: murderers, rapists, men like the one who took you." To his surprise, Willow's expression showed understanding rather than judgment. "The territories need justice, even when it doesn't come wearing a badge," she said. "Though I imagine it's a lonely life." "It is," Wade admitted, "but it's the one I chose." They had reached the mouth of Eagles Canyon, and Wade noticed Willow tense as the shadow of the high walls fell across them. He guided Dust closer to her mare, ready to offer support if needed. "Would you like to turn back?" he asked gently. Willow shook her head, her knuckles white where she gripped the reins but her voice steady. "No, I need to see it." They rode a short distance into the canyon, stopping at a small clearing where Wade helped Willow dismount. They secured the horses to a juniper tree, and Wade spread a blanket from his saddlebag on a flat rock, setting out the simple picnic he had brought. Willow stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the canyon walls, lingering on the cave where she had been held captive. Wade gave her space, understanding her need to confront the geography of her fear. Finally, she turned back to him, her expression lighter than before. "It's just a place," she said, a note of wonder in her voice. "Beautiful even in its own wild way." "Most dangerous things are," Wade replied, handing her a cup of lemonade as she joined him on the blanket. They ate in companionable silence, watching as a red-tailed hawk soared on thermals high above the canyon. The peaceful scene was a far cry from the desperate circumstances of their first meeting in this place, and Wade found himself grateful for the chance to create a new memory here, one of simple pleasure rather than fear and violence. As they prepared to return to town, Willow laid a hand on Wade's arm, her touch light but purposeful. "Thank you for bringing me back here," she said, "for helping me reclaim this place from my nightmares." Wade covered her hand with his own, a gesture of acknowledgement that became something more as their fingers intertwined. "You did the hard part yourself," he told her. "I just provided the escort." Willow's smile held a warmth that reached beyond gratitude, and Wade found himself drawn toward her, the distance between them narrowing until he could feel her breath against his face. With a gentleness that belied his usual manner, he brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a demand. Her response was immediate, her free hand rising to cup his cheek as she returned the kiss with a sweet intensity that awakened something long dormant within him. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Wade knew with sudden clarity that his plans to leave Socorro would require reconsideration. The ride back to town was filled with shy glances and brushing hands, the new awareness between them lending a golden quality to the late afternoon light. By unspoken agreement, they maintained a proper distance as they entered Socorro, conscious of the watching eyes in a small community where gossip traveled faster than telegrams. At the livery stable, Wade helped Willow dismount, his hands lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary. "When can I see you again?" he asked, the directness of the question surprising even himself. "Tomorrow is Sunday," Willow replied. "Perhaps you would accompany me to church," Wade hesitated. It had been years since he had set foot in a church, and the thought of sitting among the respectable citizens of Socorro while the preacher extolled virtues Wade had long since abandoned made him uncomfortable. But the hope in Willow's eyes proved more persuasive than his reservations. "I'll call for you at your boarding house," he agreed. 9 o'clock, Willow's smile was worth the promise of potential discomfort. 9 o'clock, she confirmed. "Good night, Wade. Good night, Willow." As Wade watched her walk toward the boarding house, he acknowledged to himself that something fundamental had shifted in his world. The restlessness that had driven him across the territories for a decade seemed suddenly less urgent, less defining. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking not of where he would go next, but of reasons to stay where he was. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the church bells of Socorro calling the faithful to worship, as Wade adjusted his string tie and brushed lint from his best coat garments, rarely worn and kept in his saddlebags for occasions requiring respectability. He had even visited the barber again the previous evening, ensuring his appearance would not embarrass Willow among her neighbors. Mrs. Hollister's face registered surprise when she opened the door to find Wade on her porch, hat in hand, asking for Miss Lambert. The landlady's initial wariness gave way to approval as she noted his clean-shaven face and formal attire. "Miss Lambert will be down directly," she informed him, ushering him into the small parlor where other boarders were gathering before walking to church together. "It's good to see our schoolteacher has found a suitable escort. After that dreadful business with Tucker, we've all been concerned for her welfare." Wade maintained a polite smile, uncomfortable with the scrutiny of the other boarder's two elderly sisters who taught piano, a young bank clerk, and the town's only lawyer. He was saved from making conversation by Willow's appearance at the top of the stairs. She wore a dress of deep burgundy, more formal than her everyday teaching attire, with a matching hat adorned with a single artificial rose. The color complemented her fair complexion and brought out rich highlights in her brown hair. Wade found himself momentarily speechless as she descended the stairs, her eyes finding his with a warmth that made the other occupants of the room fade into insignificance. "Good morning, Mr. Farley," she greeted him formally, mindful of their audience. "How kind of you to escort me to services." "The pleasure is mine, Miss Lambert," Wade replied, offering his arm as they stepped out into the sunlit street. They walked toward the whitewashed church at the center of town, joining the flow of families and individuals making their way to Sunday worship. Wade was acutely conscious of the curious glances directed their way the schoolteacher and the stranger, an unexpected pairing that would undoubtedly fuel town gossip for days to come. "Everyone is staring," he murmured to Willow as they approached the church steps. "Let them," she replied with quiet confidence. "I'm proud to be seen with the man who saved my life." Inside the church, they found a seat toward the back, a location that suited Wade's desire for inconspicuousness. As the congregation rose for the first hymn, Willow's clear soprano joined the collective voice. While Wade moved his lips silently, the familiar words of faith long forgotten returning to him gradually. The sermon focused on the parable of the Good Samaritan, a coincidence that caused Willow to glance at Wade with a small, private smile. The preacher emphasized the duty of Christians to help strangers in need, regardless of background or circumstance, a message that resonated with their shared experience. "Which now of these three, thinkest thou, was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves?" The preacher quoted from Luke's Gospel. "And he said, He that showed mercy on him, then said Jesus unto him, Go, and do thou likewise." As the service concluded and the congregation filed out into the churchyard, several townspeople approached Wade and Willow. Some merely wished to be introduced to the stranger in their midst, while others expressly thanked Wade for his rescue of their beloved schoolteacher. Sheriff Morgan was among those who greeted them, pulling Wade aside while Willow chatted with a group of her students' mothers. "Tucker's being transferred to Santa Fe next week for trial," he informed Wade in a low voice. "Judge Wilson is known for his harsh sentences for crimes against women. Likely Tucker will hang or spend the rest of his days in territorial prison." Wade nodded, satisfied with the news. "Good. Men like that don't deserve second chances." The sheriff studied Wade with shrewd eyes. "Seems like you might be sticking around Socorro longer than you originally planned," he observed, glancing meaningfully toward Willow. "Might be," Wade acknowledged, unwilling to elaborate further. Morgan's weathered face broke into a knowing smile. "Town could use a man with your skills, Farley. Deputy position's open if you're interested. Pays not much, but it's steady, and you'd be serving the community rather than just passing through." The offer caught Wade by surprise. He had never considered law enforcement as a profession, given his occasional work on the other side of legal boundaries. "I appreciate the thought, Sheriff, but I'm not badge material." "Consider it," Morgan pressed. "A man reaches a point where he wants more than just the next horizon." "I see the way you look at our schoolteacher. Those kinds of feelings tend to make a man reconsider his priorities." Before Wade could respond, Willow rejoined them, her presence ending the conversation but not the thoughts it had stirred in Wade's mind. The idea of staying in Socorro, of building something permanent with Willow, was both tempting and terrifying, a path he had never envisioned for himself, but now couldn't stop considering. After church, they joined several other couples and families for dinner at the hotel restaurant, the town's most respectable eating establishment. The meal was pleasant, filled with conversation about local matters that made Wade increasingly aware of his outsider status. Yet Willow seamlessly included him, explaining context and introducing topics where his experience might contribute. As the afternoon waned, They excused themselves from the gathering and walked slowly toward the schoolhouse, where Willow needed to prepare materials for Monday's lessons. The streets were quiet, most residents observing the Sabbath rest in their homes. "You were uncomfortable in church," Willow observed as they walked, her directness catching Wade off guard. "That obvious, was it?" he asked wryly. She shook her head. "Not to others, perhaps. But I've begun to read your expressions, the tension in your shoulders when you're ill at ease." Wade considered denying it, then opted for honesty. "It's been a long time since I sat in a church pew. Wasn't sure I remembered the proper responses." "Faith isn't about proper responses," Willow said gently. "It's about an open heart." "My heart hasn't been open to much beyond survival for years," Wade admitted, "until recently." The implication hung between them as they reached the schoolhouse. Inside, Willow moved about the room, gathering books and writing lessons on the blackboard for the next day. Wade watched her work, struck by the purpose and contentment she seemed to find in her role as teacher. "You love it here," he observed. "Teaching these children, being part of this community." Willow paused, chalk in hand. "I do. It gives my life meaning beyond myself. These children are the future of this territory, this country. Helping them learn, grow, dream bigger dreams, there's no greater calling I can imagine." Her passion was evident in every word, every gesture. Wade found himself envying her certainty, her clear sense of purpose and place in the world. His own life had been defined by movement, by the next job, the next bounty, the next town on the horizon. "Sheriff Morgan offered me a deputy position," he said suddenly, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise Willow. She set down the chalk, turning to face him fully. "And what did you say?" "That I wasn't badge material," Wade replied honestly. "But I've been thinking about it since." Willow approached him slowly, her eyes searching his face. "What's keeping you from accepting, besides your conviction that you're not badge material, which I find questionable at best?" Wade smiled ruefully at her challenge. "My life hasn't exactly been a model of law-abiding citizenship, Willow. I've operated in gray areas more often than not. But always in service of justice, from what you've told me," she countered. "The law and justice aren't always the same thing, especially out here." "There's also the matter of staying in one place," Wade admitted. "I haven't done that since I left Georgia. Not sure I remember how." Willow's expression softened. "You put one foot in front of the other each morning. You build relationships with people who matter to you. You create a home, not just a place to sleep." "And is that what you want?" Wade asked, taking a step closer to her. "For me to stay, to build something here?" "I want you to be happy," Willow answered, her honesty disarming him. "If that means riding off toward the next horizon, then that's what it means. But if there's a part of you that wants to see what might grow between us, what life might be like with roots instead of wings, then yes, I want you to stay." The vulnerability in her admission moved Wade deeply. He closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I can't promise I'll be good at staying," he said softly, "but I find myself wanting to try for you." Willow's smile illuminated her entire face. "That's all anyone can ask." Their kiss was different this time, not the tentative exploration of yesterday, but a seal on something newly decided, a promise of possibilities to come. When they parted, Wade felt a sense of rightness that had eluded him for years. "I'll speak to Sheriff Morgan tomorrow," he said. About the deputy position, Willow's eyes shone with happiness. "Socorro will be fortunate to have you protecting it, as am I." As they walked back toward the boarding house in the gathering dusk, Wade reflected on the strange turns life could take. A chance discovery of drag marks leading into a canyon had led him to this moment, walking beside a woman whose courage and heart had begun to heal something broken within him. For the first time in a decade, the road ahead looked not like an escape route but like a path home. The following weeks brought significant changes to Wade Farley's life. He accepted Sheriff Morgan's offer, pinning on the deputy's badge with a mixture of pride and trepidation. The position provided him with a small but comfortable room behind the sheriff's office, a modest salary, and most importantly, a legitimate reason to remain in Socorro. His duties varied from breaking up saloon fights to escorting the monthly bank shipment to Santa Fe, tasks that utilized his tracking and shooting skills while keeping him within the boundaries of the law. The townspeople gradually accepted him as more than just the drifter who had rescued their schoolteacher, beginning to see him as a permanent part of their community. Willow, meanwhile, continued her teaching with renewed energy, expanding her educational efforts to include evening classes for adults 3 nights a week. Wade often helped with these sessions, discovering he had a knack for explaining practical mathematics to miners and ranchers who had never had formal schooling. Their courtship progressed with the measured pace dictated by small-town propriety. They rode together on Sunday afternoons, shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and occasionally met at the schoolhouse after hours to discuss books Willow had lent him. Emerson, Thoreau, and other writers whose ideas about self-reliance and the American spirit resonated with Wade despite his initial reluctance to engage with book learning. On a crisp October evening, as they walked back from one such discussion, Willow broached a subject that had been on her mind. "The school board has offered to help me build a proper home," she told Wade, "a small house near the schoolhouse with room for a garden. They feel it would encourage me to stay in Socorro permanently." Wade glanced at her, noting the careful neutrality of her expression. "And is that what you want, to stay permanently?" "I've come to love this town, these people," Willow replied, "but a house is a significant commitment. I wanted to discuss it with you before giving my answer." They had reached the town square where a stone bench offered a place to sit beneath a cottonwood tree. Wade guided Willow to the bench, taking her hands in his as they sat. "Why would my opinion matter in your decision about a house?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Willow met his gaze directly, her characteristic courage evident. "Because I've come to care deeply for you, Wade. What future I build here I hope will include you, but I need to know if that's what you want as well." The moment of truth had arrived sooner than Wade had anticipated, but he found his answer came without the hesitation he might have expected. "I want to be where you are," he said simply. "These past weeks have shown me what it means to belong somewhere to someone. I don't want to lose that." Relief and joy mingled in Willow's expression. "Then perhaps we should consider the house together," she suggested. As more than friends, Wade understood her meaning immediately. "Are you proposing marriage, Miss Lambert?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm proposing the possibility," Willow clarified, her own smile matching his. "Should you wish to formalize the arrangement in the traditional manner," Wade laughed, drawing a curious glance from a passing townsman. "I've never done anything the traditional way," he admitted. "But for you, I'm willing to learn." Rising from the bench, he shocked both Willow and himself by dropping to one knee before her, taking her hand in his. "Willow Lambert, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise wealth or an easy life, but I can promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build a home and a future together in this town you've taught me to love." Tears glistened in Willow's eyes as she nodded, too overcome for words at first. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, I will marry you, Wade Farley." Their engagement announcement was met with general approval from the Socorro community, though not without some raised eyebrows from those who considered the courtship too brief or who harbored doubts about Wade's suitability for their respected schoolteacher. Mrs. Hollister insisted on hosting a small engagement party at the boarding house, where the couple received well wishes and practical gifts for their future home. The wedding took place in late November, a simple ceremony in the same church where Wade had reluctantly accompanied Willow months earlier. She wore a dress of ivory silk ordered from Santa Fe with a veil of delicate lace that had belonged to her mother. Wade, uncomfortable in his new suit but determined to make Willow proud, stood tall beside her as they exchanged vows before the community that had become their shared home. Sheriff Morgan served as Wade's best man, while the wife of the bank president stood up for Willow. The schoolchildren formed a choir, singing hymns Willow had taught them throughout the fall term. Even the weather cooperated, providing a rare, mild day amid the approaching winter. The celebration afterward, held in the hotel dining room, featured contributions from many Socorro residents' home-baked pies, roasted meats, and even a small orchestra of local musicians who played late into the evening. Wade, never comfortable in large gatherings, nevertheless found himself enjoying the genuine goodwill extended by neighbors who had come to accept him as one of their own. As night fell and the party continued, Wade pulled Willow aside to a quiet corner. "Happy?" he asked, studying her radiant face. "More than I ever imagined possible," she assured him, reaching up to straighten his tie. "And you, any regrets about trading the open trail for a settled life?" Wade considered the question seriously before answering. "The only trail that matters now is the one we make together," he said, surprising himself with the sentiment. No regrets. Their new home, a modest two-bedroom structure near the schoolhouse, was completed just before Christmas. The school board had indeed contributed substantially to its construction, and Wade had worked alongside the town's carpenters in his off-duty hours to ensure every detail met Willow's expectations. The result was a cozy dwelling with a front porch where they could watch the sunset together, a kitchen large enough for Willow's love of baking, and a small study filled with books, a luxury Wade had never imagined for himself, but now treasured. Winter passed in a haze of newfound domestic happiness, with Wade settling into his role as deputy with increasing confidence while Willow continued to expand her educational programs. Together, they established rhythms and traditions that transformed their house into a home. Sunday dinners with friends, evening readings by the fire, quiet conversations about their days as they prepared for sleep. Spring brought new challenges as flooding threatened the lower part of town, requiring Wade to work long hours helping residents secure their properties and evacuate when necessary. Willow organized the schoolchildren to deliver meals to workers reinforcing the riverbanks, proud of her husband's dedication to the community they now both served. It was during this busy period that Willow first suspected she might be expecting a child. She kept her suspicions to herself until she was certain, finally sharing the news with Wade on a quiet evening in April as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "I visited Dr. Miller today," she began, her hand finding Wade's on the arm of his chair. "He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now. We're going to have a baby, Wade, in late October." Wade's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to joy in rapid succession. "A baby," he repeated, the words sounding foreign and miraculous on his lips. "Our baby." Willow nodded, tears of happiness threatening to spill. "Our family is beginning." Wade knelt before her chair, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he whispered, "for this, for everything you've brought into my life." "We've built this together," Willow reminded him, covering his hand with her own. "This home, this life, this future. From the moment you followed those tracks into Eagles Canyon, we've been creating this path." As summer bloomed across the New Mexico territory, Willow continued teaching despite her advancing pregnancy, determined to complete the school year before taking time to prepare for their child's arrival. Wade, meanwhile, found himself becoming increasingly protective, accompanying her to and from the schoolhouse whenever his duties allowed and making sure she rested adequately. Their home expanded to accommodate the coming addition, a cradle crafted by the town's carpenter, tiny garments sewn by Willow and the ladies of the church, a rocking chair positioned perfectly in the nursery to catch the morning light. Wade even built bookshelves for children's stories, though the baby wouldn't need them for years. "You're nesting," Willow teased him one evening as he installed a window lock for added security. Like a mother bird preparing for her chicks, Wade grinned, unembarrassed by his enthusiasm. "Just making sure everything's ready," he defended himself. "A man likes to be prepared." The changes weren't limited to their home. Wade had begun putting aside a portion of his salary each month, establishing a savings account at the Socorro bank with an eye toward their child's future education. He had also started discussions with Sheriff Morgan and the town council about expanding his role in law enforcement, potentially taking over as sheriff when Morgan retired in a few years. These plans for the future represented a profound shift in Wade's outlook. Where once he had lived day to day, taking whatever work came his way and never looking beyond the next horizon, he now found himself invested in building something lasting, a legacy for the child who would carry his name. October arrived with its golden light and cooling temperatures, the mountains surrounding Socorro dusted with the first snow of the season. Willow had reluctantly given up teaching in late August, her energy diminished as the baby grew. She occupied herself with preparing the nursery, reading medical texts about childbirth, and writing letters to her parents in Boston, who had gradually reconciled themselves to their daughter's Western life and impending grandparenthood. On the evening of October 15th, as Wade returned home from his patrol, he found Willow standing in the kitchen, one hand braced against the table, the other cradling her swollen belly. "It's time," she said simply, her face pale but determined. "Dr. Miller should be summoned." Wade felt a surge of panic, followed immediately by the calm focus that had served him well in dangerous situations throughout his life. "I'll get him right away," he promised, helping Willow to their bedroom before rushing back out into the night. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of anxiety and wonder. Dr. Miller arrived promptly, joined by Mrs. Hollister, who had experience assisting with births. Wade was banished to the front room where he paced endlessly, wincing at each cry from the bedroom and praying with more sincerity than he had mustered in years. Shortly after dawn, Mrs. Hollister emerged, her tired face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Deputy Farley," she announced. "You have a daughter." Wade entered the bedroom on unsteady legs to find Willow propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. "Come meet your daughter," she invited, her voice weak but joyful. Wade sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in awe at the tiny face nestled against Willow's breast. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and skin still red from birth, but to Wade she was perfection itself. "Would you like to hold her?" Willow asked. With trembling hands, Wade accepted the swaddled infant, marveling at how light yet substantial she felt in his arms. The baby's eyes opened briefly blue like all newborns, but Wade imagined they might stay that way like her mother's. "What shall we call her?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Willow had considered many names during her pregnancy but now felt certain of the right choice. "Hope," she said softly, "because that's what she represents for us both, hope for the future we're building together." "Hope Farley," Wade repeated, testing the name and finding it perfect. "Welcome to the world, little one." As he cradled his daughter, Wade reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. A chance decision to follow mysterious tracks into a canyon had led him not just to rescue a woman in peril, but to save himself from a life of rootless wandering. In Willow, he had found not only a partner but a home, in Socorro, not just a town but a community. And now, in Hope, the promise of a future brighter than he had ever dared imagine. Outside their window, the sun rose fully over the New Mexico landscape, bathing their small family in golden light, a new day in a life that had only just begun. 5 years passed, bringing changes both to Socorro and to the Farley family. Wade had indeed become sheriff following Morgan's retirement, his steady leadership and fair-minded approach earning him the respect of even those who had initially doubted the former drifter. Willow had returned to teaching after Hope's first birthday, balancing her professional calling with motherhood in a way that inspired other young women in the territory. Hope grew into a spirited child with her mother's intelligence and her father's adventurous nature, a combination that often left her parents both proud and exhausted. She was the darling of Socorro, beloved by shopkeepers who slipped her peppermint sticks and elderly residents who delighted in her precocious questions. The Farley home had expanded along with their family. Wade had added a larger porch where neighbors gathered on warm evenings, and Willow's garden now provided vegetables for their table throughout the growing season. They had even acquired a gentle retriever mix named Scout, who followed Hope everywhere and slept at the foot of her bed each night. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Wade arranged a special surprise for Willow. After Hope was tucked into bed with Scout standing guard, he saddled their horses and led his wife on a moonlit ride to a familiar destination, Eagles Canyon. "Why here?" Willow asked as they dismounted near the canyon entrance, the place where their story had begun now transformed by years of positive associations. Wade spread a blanket on the same flat rock where they had shared their first picnic, producing a bottle of wine and 2 glasses from his saddlebag. "Because sometimes it's important to remember where you started," he explained, pouring the wine and handing her a glass. "To see how far you've come," Willow smiled, understanding his sentiment. They sat side by side, looking up at the vast canopy of stars overhead, their shoulders touching comfortably. "If someone had told me 6 years ago that being dragged into this canyon would lead to the happiest years of my life, I would have thought them mad," Willow mused, sipping her wine. "Yet here we are, Wade agreed, his free arm circling her waist. "Sheriff and schoolteacher, parents to the most remarkable child in the territory, pillars of the community." Willow laughed softly at his description. "Pillars might be overstating it a bit." "Not from where I'm sitting," Wade countered. "You've transformed the school, I've helped make the town safer, and between us, we've raised a daughter who will probably be governor of New Mexico someday. She'll need to learn to sit still for more than 5 minutes first," Willow pointed out pragmatically, though her voice held nothing but adoration for their energetic daughter. They lapsed into comfortable silence, enjoying the rare moment of solitude together. Finally, Wade set down his glass and turned to face Willow fully. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small velvet box. "To mark 5 years." Willow opened the box to find a delicate gold locket, similar to the one she had nearly lost in the canyon but more elaborate. Inside were tiny portraits, Wade on one side, Hope on the other. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Will you help me put it on?" Wade fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin. "I have another piece of news," he said as she admired the locket. "The territorial governor has offered me a position with the New Mexico Rangers." Willow's eyes widened. "The Rangers, that would mean." "Travel," Wade confirmed. "More responsibility, more danger potentially. I told him I needed to discuss it with you before giving an answer." Willow considered the implications carefully. The Rangers were an elite force that handled complex cases across the territory, a prestigious assignment, but one that would take Wade away from Socorro regularly. "What do you want?" she asked finally. Wade's response was honest. "Part of me is drawn to the challenge. But a bigger part values what we've built here, our home, our place in this community. I won't accept if you have reservations." Willow reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You've given me everything I ever wanted, Wade. A home, a family, a purpose. If this opportunity calls to you, I won't stand in your way. Socorro will be here when you return from your missions." Wade studied her face in the moonlight, once again struck by the strength and generosity of the woman he had married. "Are you certain? It would mean changes for all of us." "Life is change," Willow said simply. "We've weathered it before, we'll weather it again." Wade pulled her close, overwhelmed by gratitude for her understanding. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against her hair. Willow leaned back to look into his eyes. "You followed my trail when I was dragged into this canyon," she reminded him. "You pulled me out alive when others might have passed by. Every happiness I've known since then, I owe to that moment of courage and compassion. Never doubt that you deserve every joy we've shared." Their kiss beneath the star-filled sky sealed both the anniversary celebration and the decision about their future. As they rode back toward Socorro in the deep hours of the night, Wade reflected on the extraordinary turns his life had taken since that fateful day 6 years earlier. From solitary drifter to husband, father, sheriff, and now potentially a ranger, each step had seemed impossible until love showed him otherwise. The horizon still called to him, But now it was not an escape route, but a journey he could undertake with the certainty of home behind him and family waiting for his return. As the lights of Socorro appeared in the distance, Wade reached across to take Willow's hand, their horses moving in comfortable synchronicity. "Thank you," he said simply. Willow squeezed his hand in return, no further words necessary between them. They rode on toward home, toward Hope sleeping peacefully under Scout's watchful eye. Toward the future, they continued to build together a future made possible by one man's decision to follow a desperate trail into a canyon, and one woman's courage to build a new life from the ashes of fear. And in that quiet moment, riding side by side under the vast New Mexico sky, both knew with absolute certainty that the greatest adventure of their lives was not the danger they had faced or the challenges they had overcome, but the love they had discovered, a love that had transformed not only their own lives, but the very landscape of their hearts.